This is an introduction to William Wordsworth's Prelude by Michael Elliott at the University of Calgary. This introduction is indebted to Emma Mason's Cambridge Companion to William Wordsworth, to the BBC Radio 4 program In Our Time, episode of 22nd of November 2007, and finally to Stephen Gill's 21st Century Oxford Authors edition of the poem. The Prelude is a kind of autobiography of William Wordsworth, in which he recounts the experiences of his life in nature and in human society. It follows Wordsworth's experience from childhood episodes to his education at Cambridge University to the 2,000-mile walking tour that he took across the Alps. It moves into then his travels in France after the French Revolution in 1791 through 93. And finally, it returns Wordsworth to England and his meeting with Samuel Taylor Coleridge. But the Prelude is far more than merely Wordsworth's life story. It's the story of the growth of Wordsworth's mind, the development of his aesthetic sensibility, and his philosophical ideas. And not surprisingly for Wordsworth, a lot of this focuses on his encounters with nature. Wordsworth's imagination and mind were really stimulated by connections with nature, rather than by intellectual pursuits. In his poem Home at Grasmere, which was part one of a longer work that was unfinished called The Growth of a Poet's Mind, that became one of the many titles and actually the Prelude's subtitle ultimately. By the way, Wordsworth never called the poem The Prelude. We take that title from an 1814 philosophical text called The Excursion, and it mentions an autobiographical poem that is what he calls a prelude to this one, hence the title. But here's what Wordsworth writes in Home at Grasmere, starting at line 1006. How exquisitely the individual mind and the progressive powers, perhaps no less of the whole species, to the external world is fitted. And how exquisitely, too, theme this but little heard of among men, the external world is fitted to the mind, and the creation, by no lower name can it be called, which they with blended might accomplish. This is my great argument. Then further below, starting at line 1030, come, or just above 1030 rather, come thou prophetic spirit, soul of man, thou human soul of the wide earth, that hast thy metropolitan temple in the hearts of mighty poets. Unto me vouchsafe thy guidance, teach me to discern and part inherent things from casual, what is fixed from fleeting, that my verse may live and be even as a light hung up in heaven to cheer mankind in times to come. And if with this I blend more lowly matter, with the thing contemplated describe the mind and man contemplating, and who and what he was, the transitory being that beheld this vision, when and where and how he lived, his joys and sorrows, and his hopes and fears, with all his little realities of life, be not this labor useless? There were multiple versions of the poem in Wordsworth's life. It began first as a 2-book poem in 1799, then 5 books by 1804, then 13 books by 1805, and ultimately 14 books by 1839. He began writing it when he was 28 years old in the late 1790s. He was born in 1770. And by the time he was 69 years old, he was still revising the poem. It was not ultimately published until after his death in 1850. Part of the reason Wordsworth could never finish the poem was because both of his subject itself and his sense of the provisionality of language. Language is never final. It is never definitive. It's never adequate to the truth. The truth, you might ask, of what? Well, the truth of experience, the truth of the language that we use to try to summarize experience, the truth of the self, which is emotionally complex, psychologically complex. It's always partial, it is always shifted and fragmented, and it resists the kind of arbitrary fixity or certainty that language imposes on that self, on that experience. The purpose of the Prelude is for Wordsworth to reflect on the random and accidental moments of experience which reveal far more than we can expect if, that is, we're attentive to all of their meaning. This is life that is led not according to plan, but according to immediate circumstances, according to an openness to the truth that those circumstances can reveal, rather than bending the world to your will or making it fit into a coherent and systematic narrative. It is, for Wordsworth, nature that helps us to live with that sense of arbitrariness, of the arbitrariness of existence and of meaning itself. And that nature is struggling against forces like reason and industrialization, which can reduce a person's individuality.